Hello and welcome to another episode of the Best You interview series. It's Gary here again. Thank you very much, as always, for taking the time to tune in. And today I'm delighted to be joined by speaker and author Terry Tucker, who is here today to discuss his newest book, Sustainable Excellence: 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. Absolutely love the title and can't wait to get into at least some of the principles from the book. In terms of Terry, Terry has reinvented himself frequently over his professional career, and I'll get into some of that. And when I talk about the various changes that Terry made in his career, also add into that significant geographical changes in where he is living with his family. So it's not just the stress and strain and growth associated with making a career change. There are literal cultural differences and geographic nuances that he had to add in as well, which I think is very pertinent to note. And there, after graduating from college, he was employed in marketing, then hospital administration, customer service and publishing, then became a police officer, primarily as a SWAT hostage negotiator, no less. And after that, he started a school security consulting business and coached high school girls basketball in Houston. Each time he took on a new job, he developed new skills and faced different challenges, all contributing to his ongoing learning curve. However, his greatest challenge began in 2012 when he was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer called acral lentiginous melanoma. Apologies if I butchered that name. Hopefully I didn't, which presented on the bottom of his foot. And by the time the melanoma was detected, it had metastasized to a lymph node in his groin. He had two surgeries to remove the tumors, and after he healed, he was put on weekly injection of the drug interferon to help keep the disease from returning. And Terry took those injections weekly for almost 5 years before the ingredients within the cocktail, if I could say that, became so toxic to his body that he ended up in the intensive care unit. The injections were so impactful to his ongoing health that he experienced a whole host of debilitating and life-altering symptoms. And there were times he felt so poorly and was in so much agony that he actually prayed to die. That's how dire things got for him. Now, one main lesson I should say that Terry learned and during this traumatic time is that you have two choices. You can succumb to the debilitating discomfort and misery, or you can learn to embrace it and use it to make you a stronger and better human being. And thankfully, he chose the latter. So Terry decided to use this experience to write the book, as I mentioned earlier, Sustainable Excellence: 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life, to help people find and live their uncommon and extraordinary life. The 10 principles outlined in the book will provide the bedrock necessary to form the foundation of unshakable beliefs and dedicated behaviors to reinforce your attitude, no matter how much pain you must endure or how many obstacles you must overcome. In the book, Terry answers the three basic questions that will lead you to your best life. What is excellence? How do you achieve it? And most importantly, how do you sustain it? Terry understands what it's like to fight for your life, and one thing he has learned is that as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. Oh my word, Terry, what a journey you have been on. And to get the opportunity to sit and talk to you about this is going to be an incredible experience for me, and I'm very sure for the listeners. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with me today.
Well, Gary, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
It's very, very, it's very, very poignant that we're talking about a variety of factors in life. The general journey of life, in terms of career, in terms of change, in terms of growth opportunities, in terms of trying different things, and then coming across a significant life event, significant debilitating, life-altering, changing event, you know in your battle with cancer and the subsequent treatment implications, which sounded incredibly challenging, can you take us through your initial reaction to the diagnosis and how that experience helped shape your outlook on both your journey during the treatment and then subsequently?
Sure. So when I was diagnosed, I was a girls' high school basketball coach, as you mentioned, and I had a callus break open on the bottom of my left foot, right below my third toe. And initially didn't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment, went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine.
Yeah.
And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It's just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it. No dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave, excuse me, either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I get the call from him that literally changes my life. And as I mentioned, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming until finally he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years and I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have an incredibly rare form of melanoma. And most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun and it affects the melon, the pigment in our skin. Mine has nothing to do with sun exposure. It's a rare form that appears on the bottom of the feet and the palms of the hands. And he suggested we have a cancer center, MD Anderson Cancer Center here in the United States. He said, because your cancer is so uncommon, you need to go be treated there. And so I did. And I had surgery to remove the tumor on the bottom of my foot and all the lymph nodes in my groin. And then my doctor said, you'll more than likely be dead in 2 years. And I thought, well, okay, you gave me a death sentence. How can I turn that death sentence into a life sentence?
Yeah.
And I mean, Gary, I don't want your audience or you or anybody to think that it wasn't difficult. I know I went through all the stages that we would associate with grief. You know, first it was denial. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. And then I got mad. It was like, I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. And then there was a bargaining phase. Our daughter was in high school when I was diagnosed of, come on, God, let me live long enough to see her graduate from high school. And then I absolutely got down. I got depressed. I felt sorry for myself. And then I just got to a point where it was like, well, this sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace the suck. You know, I don't like the cards that I've been dealt, but I'm going to have to play these cards to the best of my ability with whatever time I have left. And turns out it's been 12 plus years now. And I'm just very fortunate to still be here.
It's absolutely incredible. And one of the things that you mentioned there in terms of you're obviously the person going through this, then you have a wife, you have a daughter, and even in so much as your friend, the doctor who is involved in this, that there are so many more people involved in your journey than just you. How did you navigate that through the process?
Yeah, I've always said I've gotten through this 12-year experience with cancer by what I call my 3 Fs, which are faith, family, and friends. I have a very strong faith in God. You mentioned I was on interferon for almost 5 years, had the flu, gave me terrible flu-like symptoms every week after each injection. And there was a point where I was so sick of being sick that I prayed to die. It was like, come on, God, take me out of this. I felt there were sort of two camps. There was the living and the not dying. And I was in the not dying camp. I didn't really feel I was living. I just felt I was sort of marking time. So faith was incredibly important. And then, my wife and daughter, it's just the three of us. I mean, I have brothers, and my mom is still alive in that. But I remember, fast forward, I had my leg amputated during the COVID pandemic. And I remember my doctor wanted to put me on chemotherapy. And I said, is it going to save my life? He said, no, but it might buy you some more time. And I said, well, if the outcome is going to be the same, I don't think I want to do it, but I'll go home and talk to my family. And so I go home and start telling my wife and daughter what's going on. And my daughter's immediately, all right, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's 3 of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that. So we individually sit around the kitchen table and talk about how we feel about me having chemotherapy. And then when we're done with that, my daughter's like, all right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raised their hand. I'm like, wait a minute. Am I getting outvoted for something that I don't want to do?
Yeah.
But I remembered when I was back in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we loved the most to class. And as we were learning different techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I ended up taking chemotherapy, not because I wanted to, but because I love my wife and daughter more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it was the right thing to do. It was a bridge that got me to the drug that I'm on now. But if it hadn't been for them, you and I probably wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
So powerful. During our pre-interview and then prior to coming on today, you just have such a positive energy about you. And obviously you've given us a wee bit of detail in terms of the stages of the journey that you went on. But in general terms, it appears to me that you have a positive outlook on life, which is why you were compelled to help others through the book and through your speaking engagements. What techniques did you use to establish and sustain and maintain your positivity? Is that within your 3F framework as well?
I think when you understand that you're going to die, I enjoy Stoic philosophy. I enjoy reading Stoic books and things like that. And the Stoic philosophers used to talk about what was called memento mori, which means remember death, remember that you're going to die. And not for the sake that you're going to die, but for the importance of what you need to do while you're alive.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I've accepted the fact that, I was supposed to be dead 10 years ago, but yet I'm still here. So I don't worry so much about the dying part, the death part of it. I concentrate more on the living part. And 100 years from now, Gary, nobody's going to remember you and I were even here. I mean, but what I want to be remembered for are the connections that I have, the relationships that I have with other people. Those are incredibly important to me. One of my nurses who still cares for me now, I still have tumors in my lungs, is a former hospice nurse. And for those of your audience who don't know what a hospice nurse is, it's people who take care of others at the end of their life. And she gave me this book to read, and it was called Imagine Heaven. And it's a book about people who have near-death experiences. And regardless of who the person having the near-death experience saw during that experience, whether it was, Jesus or a saint or an angel or a friend or a relative, whoever it was, almost everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody got asked one question. How do you treat my people? In other words, how do we treat each other? What relationships do we have each other and things like that? And I figure, if the creator of the whole world is asking us how we treat each other, maybe that's something we ought to focus on. And so, like I said, I don't care about money or power or influence. None of that stuff matters. It doesn't go with you after you die.
Yeah.
But what does go, what that are those relationships, those feelings, those connections you have with other human beings. And that's really what I'm trying to do. And that lends me to being a positive person. I mean, the interactions I have with people. If I was always down and a woe is me and look how terrible my life is, nobody'd want to associate with me. We want to associate with positive people. So I need to be positive if I want to have those connections and those relationships.
Absolutely. And it just talks to me about impact, the impact that you are trying to make. And you can make more impact with honey than you can with vinegar, to use that adage. And of course, as you say, people are drawn more to positivity than they are to negativity. So let's take a step back for a second. I mentioned briefly during your bio that you had a very varied career as you were going through. I'd love to know a little bit about the intention. Some people fall into a career, some people intentionally go after it. But in terms of the variety, the types and styles of roles, the growth that you enjoyed and sometimes possibly endured during, the various careers, and how that manifested itself into resilience and how you go about living your life today. What motivated you originally to have such significant career changes, and how do you think that each of those prepared for the next role and ultimately to where we are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, yeah, if you look at my resume, it looks like kind of a Super Bowl went off in the room. It's just kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
But there is a backstory to it. And if you understand the backstory, the resume makes a little bit more sense. And the backstory was this: my grandfather, my dad's father, was a Chicago police officer. Chicago is one of the larger cities here in the United States from 1924 to 1954. And in 1933, he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury, he was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories that my grandmother told of that knock on the door of, Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. So when I expressed an interest in sort of following in my grandfather's footsteps, my father was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's the life my father wanted me to lead. That's not the life I felt I was supposed to lead. So when I graduated from college, unfortunately, my father and my grandmother were both dying of different forms of cancer. So I had probably the first major adult decision in my life. I could have said, "Hey, Dad, I know you're dying, but sorry, I'm going to go blaze my trail and do my own thing." Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So understanding that backstory, I did what my dad wanted me to do. My first jobs out of college were in the marketing department of a fast food chain. And then I went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. And I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited till my father passed away, and then I followed my own dreams. And at 37 years old, became a rookie police officer. And honestly, Gary, of all the things I'm proud of in my life, one of the most is that I never let that dream die. I never let that purpose, I could have said, "Hey, I'm making good money. I'm an 8 to 5 kind of suit and tie guy."
Yeah.
And I gave all that up because I knew my purpose was to be in law enforcement. So I'm really proud that I did that because it was really a fulfilling career for me.
Yeah, and in terms of the changes to, different areas of the country that you lived in, at the time, did you appreciate how much that was helping you grow as a person, embedding yourself in new cultures and new ways of doing things and new environmental conditions and such? Or is that something that you think has been more laterally kind of tacked on to your experience?
No, I think I understood it. I mean, the United States is a big country, and living in different parts of it, whether it was the South, whether it was the Southwest, whether it was the West Coast, East Coast, Midwest, it all has a different flavor, a different vibe, different foods, and things like that. And I enjoyed that. Plus, my wife always tells me it was a great opportunity to declutter. We're moving, so we got to get rid of all this garbage and stuff like that. So it was always a good opportunity to do that as well. But it also, especially having a daughter, gave her an opportunity to see different parts of the country. I mean, my brothers were born and raised in Chicago, are still living in Chicago, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think I've had a much richer experience by being able to travel and live in different areas of the United States. It's been a blast, and we still have a tremendous amount of friends all over the country. Every, Christmas, we send out about 150 Christmas cards because we've lived so many different places.
Yeah, I love that. And it's such a resonating story. I grew up in the west of Scotland in a not a city, in a town called Paisley, and we didn't at the time. I believe it's different now. I've been gone for almost 20 years, but there was very little transient. Everyone was everyone, and we were the same. And the very, very odd occasion, a new pupil would come into the school that I was in. And at a very young age, I started to realize that the more interesting or the most interesting people that I would come across are people that had done some level of traveling. And that could, in the west of Scotland, that could be 20 miles, from Irvine to Paisley or something like that. And there was just a growth, just a worldliness about them, how they went about it, how they integrated, and it was so fascinating to me to see it and exciting, and probably one of the cornerstones or foundations of me, deciding at a relatively young age that, I think my purpose in life would be to go and try and explore things over in Canada. I had family here. and give that myself that opportunity to grow, try it out, see what it's like, see if it's actually something that's for me or not, because you truly don't know until you're in the mix. So yeah, I definitely resonate with that. So onto your book, what was the main inspiration behind writing your book?
Yeah, I never expected to write a book, never really wanted to write a book. There's sort of an old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God never told me to write a book or anything like that. But I really believe what God did was put enough people in my path. And this has happened before in my life where you're kind of going down a road and you really don't know where you're going. And then people start making the same suggestion. You should write a book. You should write a book. You should write a book. And I think I'm old enough, smart enough now to say when that happens, I need to pay attention to it. So
Yeah.
sustainable excellence was really born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached in basketball in high school who had moved to the area in Colorado where my wife and I live with her fiance. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And Gary, she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, "Well, coach, what do you think my purpose is?" I said, "I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were, or reasons you were put on the face of this earth. And there are reasons, there is a reason why you're here, using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason." So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man reach out to me on social media from college who said, "What do you think are the most important things I need to learn or understand, not to just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life?" And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help out. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we all know. I wanted to see if I could go deeper with him. And so I spent some time taking notes and kind of had these 10 ideas, these 10 thoughts, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, I got a life story that fits underneath this particular principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So literally during the 4 to 5 month period where I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
Wow, that's incredible. So can you share a couple as a teaser, a couple of the principles from your book that you believe would be the most critical for overcoming adversity?
Sure. I think one of the ones that I put in there, and I put it in because I've done this in my life. And in all honesty, I'm not proud of the fact that I have done this. And the principle is this: most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. And
Yeah.
I know I've done that. I know I've wanted to get involved, in a project or a business or something like that. And you kind of pull back and you're like, "Ooh, wait a minute. Maybe I don't have enough information, or maybe I'm not smart enough, or what will people say about me if I fail?" That's thinking with our fears and our insecurities. That's not thinking with our minds. And whenever I get the opportunity to speak to young people, especially, I always tell them this: if there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be the things you did. They're going to be those things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them. So that's one of the principles. The other one kind of goes along with what the story that I told you about how I kind of waited, but eventually got to be a police officer. And the principle is you are the person you're looking to become. You may not be that person yet. I mean, I always felt I was a police officer. I always felt I was going to be in law enforcement, even when I was in business, even when I was wearing a suit and tie to work and all that kind of stuff. I always felt I was going to be that person. So if you feel that, if that's something inside you, I'm working toward that. I was 37 years old when I started my career in law enforcement, which is pretty old to be getting into that line of work. I mean, I graduated from college when I was 21. So it was a long time before I reached my purpose, before I got to where I wanted to be. But I always felt I was that person. So those are just two of the principles. And The rest of them are kind of like that. What I think you should have been. Let me give you just one more because I think it's probably the most important, and it's the last principle, and it's love is the most important word in any language. And guys don't like to talk about love. It's like that's kind of we don't talk about that stuff. But it's not romantic love. It's not that kind of thing. It's the love of self. It's the love of other people. Excuse me. It's the love of what you do in your life. And so many people never do that. So many people never even contemplate what it looks like to be great or good at something in your life. I've always heard the saying that the richest real estate in the world are our cemeteries because they're areas rich in books never written, relationships never pursued, businesses never started. When you end up in the cemetery, don't have those regrets.
Yeah, that is so powerful. My favorite band is the Beatles, and they
Okay.
were all about love. And I have lots of body art dedicated to love, and all you need is love. And that also resonates so much with me. The very last thing you said there, Terry, in terms of the richness of real estate in the cemetery. Back in 2018, I travelled back from Calgary to Glasgow in Scotland to essentially say goodbye to my best friend, who was unfortunately dying of cancer. And I actually talked about this on another podcast that I do around about the same time, where after he passed, I did a wee bit of a memoriam for him. And I went back to say goodbye. Spent some time with him, a couple of days. And when it got to the final literal conversation that I would have an opportunity to say, what I wanted to say, which was, I love you. Thank you for everything. I'm so proud of you. You don't realize how much you meant to me, how much you've helped me grow. I didn't say any of that because, as a stereotypical white male from the west of Scotland, we don't talk about any of that sort of thing. So we made a little bit of a joke and we kind of had a little bit of a dummy fight with each other. We both looked at each other and knew what we meant. And then I left and I got in the car and drove back with my dad and my love. And they were kind of like, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm fine," because that's what we were conditioned to be, which was fine. And it was only after his passing I said to myself, I will never, ever do that again. And not that I think I shortchanged him in any way. He wouldn't have expected any less. He appreciated the gesture. He knew where I was coming from. He knew that I loved him, but it would have been hell of a nice to say, and I'm sure it would have been hell of a nice for him to hear it at the same time. So that was a growth lesson, and I think he was placed in that position to help me learn that lesson, and then help that lesson, manifest itself into the other teachings and workings that I would do as I go forward. So yeah, a little bit of a personal story there. So back to the sustainable excellence. How do you define excellence for Terry, and what strategies do you use to sustain it, in your life?
Yeah, you write a book called Sustainable Excellence, and people are always like, "Well, what is excellence?" And my response to that is, "I don't know." And people, "What do you mean you don't know? You wrote a book. I mean, how could you put it in the title if you don't know what it is?"
Yeah.
And when I clarify this, you'll understand. I think excellence is kind of like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder.
Yes.
Gary, you and I may look at a sports team or, a piece of music or a play or a person, whatever. And, you might say, man, they are excellent. And I may say, yeah, I think they're good, but I don't think they're excellent. So I don't think there's one definition where all of us can agree that that thing or that person or that entity is excellent. You have to determine excellence for yourself. Have
Yes.
you done what needs to be done for you to say, I am excellent, or that person is excellent, or whatever it ends up being? So I don't have an answer for what excellence is. You have to determine that. But how do you sustain it? I think you constantly have to innovate. You constantly have to grow. I've seen so many people, I've seen so many companies, they work hard, they struggle. There's all kinds of adversity they overcome, and they get to the top of the mountain. And then what do? They kind of sit back in the chair, put their feet up on the desk, pour themselves a drink, and be like, I've arrived. And then
Yes.
what happens? 6 months later, boom, somebody passes them up and they're like, whoa, what happened there? What happened there is you stopped being hungry. You stopped loving the grind and getting out there, and somebody else figured out how to do what you're doing and do it better. And they passed you up. So you sustain excellence by continuing to grow, by continuing to develop new markets, by continuing to find other customers to serve with either other services or your current service. And I love there's the story, and I'm going to talk about a woman's undergarment company now. So hang with me on this one. All right.
Yeah.
There's a guy by the name of Jesse Itzler, and he's an entrepreneur here in the U.S.
Yeah.
He part owner of one of the NBA, National Basketball Association teams, and he's married to a woman by the name of Sarah Blakely.
Yeah.
And Sarah Blakely started the woman's undergarment company called Spanx.
Yeah.
And Itzler tells the story. He says, she was a facsimile door-to-door salesperson. We don't even use faxes anymore for the most part.
Yeah.
And he said she started that company with $5,000 and one prototype. And the point he's trying to make is, if she would have waited until she understood marketing and finance and distribution and production and all that, he said, I guarantee somebody else would have come up with that idea and started it. His comment or his point is, wherever you are, just start. Just start and figure it out as you go along. We all like to think that when we get to the top of the mountain, that's what life is about. I got news for you. It's not. It's the journey to get to the top of the mountain that life is all about. It's what you overcome. It's what you figure out. It's the relationships you have along the way. That's what life is about. So wherever you are, you want to start something, you want to get involved in something, just do it. Well, I don't have all the answers. That's okay. Just jump in, figure it out as you go along.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And in terms of business, there are hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of stories of people doing just that. Of saying, I didn't know, and this is not embellished for any sort of fortitude in the future to look back and pretend that there was a strategy behind it, or this is just the way you have to get things done. They just said, no time like the present. Let's go. Let's do something, and then carry on from there. And the Spanx example is a fantastic example. I recently finished the masterclass with Sarah Blakely and her journey, and she was showing some of the prototypes in the beginning and what she was doing. She would fly all over the country and stand in the department store, and that's the journey, like the absorption of what it is she's actually trying to build, understanding of customer need, and when they're likely to purchase, when they're not likely to purchase, and things. And she probably never approached that in terms of, these are the strategies and these are the lessons I need to learn. She was just a literal sponge of the experience and the information and the lesson. And I think that lends itself to the journey that you were talking about there, Terry, just in terms of, what does that actually look like as you move forward in life? And when you get to that point, what's next? Because it's not sitting, having a drink and patting yourself on the back. What is next? And if next is to stand aside and let someone else take over, but do it with intention. Constantly ask yourself the questions that need to be asked as you're going forward to make sure that you're on the right track, and any course corrections that might have to be introduced, and then move forward. But the journey part, not the destination, the journey is absolutely key. So before we wrap up here, this has been a fantastic conversation. What advice would you give to someone who's currently facing significant personal or professional challenges, especially those that feel somewhat insurmountable, maybe akin to what you were experiencing?
Let me tell you just two stories. One's going to be really short. The other's going to be just a tad longer. There was a writer here, died in the 1960s, but very prolific writer by the name of Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book called Farewell to Arms, which is a pseudo autobiography of his time as an ambulance driver for the Italian army during World War I. And there's a line in that book that goes, life breaks everyone, and afterward, many are stronger at the broken places. So understand that life is going to break you. I mean, somebody close to you might die. You might unexpectedly lose your job. Like me, you might find out you have a chronic or a terminal illness. Life is going to break you. But just like if you break your arm and the doctor puts it in a cast and it heals, that arm will be stronger at the place that it was broken. The same is true of life. If you can get through the difficulty, you're going to be stronger coming out the other end.
Yeah.
And the second story is a true story. It happened back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University here in the United States. There was a professor who did a very simple experiment with rats. He took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he took the exact same rats and put them back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, on average, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now think about that. The first time, 15 minutes. It's not like you're going to flunk a test or your business is going to go under. You're going to die.
Yeah.
Second time around, 60 hours, which taught me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives. That if we know we're doing the right thing, maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even this year, but if we know we're doing the right thing, there's a good chance we'll get to where we want to be at some point in time. And the second thing it taught me was just how much more our physical bodies can handle. I mean, don't get me wrong, Gary, I think everybody's got a breaking point.
Yeah.
But that breaking point is so much further down the road than we ever thought it would be. So, your brain tells you this hurts, it's uncomfortable, I don't like it, stop it. And we listen to the brain. Don't listen to your brain. Push through your brain like a marathon runner and find that second wind on the other side.
Incredible. Inspiring. Absolutely inspiring. Terry, where can the listeners find you?
So I have a blog/website called Motivational Check. I put up a thought for the day every day. You can get access to my social media links, other podcasts I've been on. You can leave me a message. That's all at motivationalcheck.com.
Incredible. Incredible. I'll put all the details on the blurb for today's pod. Terry, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share some of your story, and I wish you all the very best in the future, my friend.
Well, Gary, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed talking with you today.